welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to the masterclass, The First AI Agent in Your Company. My name is Joschua Ziethen, and I'm an AI and UX consultant for Gradion. And I just started working for Gradion 1 month ago, so I just recently moved here, also to Saigon, located here. And so as you see, I have the combination of AI and UX, which is something that's not that often in the space of AI. Like, you mostly have like tech guys going into AI and talking about it. And so my approach is a little bit different. So I already have to disappoint people who think there will be like the deep tech talk here about the first agent. For me, it's more, as a UX consultant, it's more looking at like it as an approach of solving a problem and not just implementing cool tech or cool AI, but really looking at what is a problem that we can solve with AI and how can we solve it in the most efficient way. So to get into it, it's a little bit, Lars already mentioned it in his talk. There is like a problem currently in AI, which is that a lot of AI projects are failing. So there is an MIT research from last year which states that 95% of enterprise AI pilots fail to deliver the expected returns. And we also had Lars mentioning those numbers. And so with this, I'm going a little bit into like what my motivation is behind this talk, because everybody's talking about AI. Everyone is posting about AI on LinkedIn and everything. But still, we've seen a lot of projects that we're missing the expected returns and what we want to reach with AI, and also especially with agentic AI. The research further states that 60% of organizations evaluated enterprise AI systems, but just then 20% of them advanced to the pilot stage, and only 5% of them reached production. And a quote from that is, "The core barrier to scaling is not infrastructure, regulation, or talent, it is learning." So, and this is the reason why I had this talk, because there's a lot of people out there who want to do something with AI, who want to leverage this technique, who want to leverage this technology, but if they try, a lot of them fail, and they don't really know how to learn or how to start or how to get an angle at starting, especially with AI agents. And one huge problem is also that for a lot of people, AI is kind of the everything solver. And they have a problem and they think like, we just bash AI on top and it's going to solve our problem. And then we usually get to those stats of people failing. And because the approach of going into the project involves like a quite simple thinking of not really looking at the problem, but first having the solution, saying like, we first have AI, now let's search the problem we can solve with it. And this usually is an approach which then leads to failure, because you're not starting from the problem up. And before we go further into the explanation of how I would say a good approach is towards that problem of solving and implementing agentic AI into your company, I first want to have a quick recap about what actually is an agent, because I think there's a lot of confusion sometimes on some parts when people talk. And so I will just quickly want to start from the ground up, that we have a model at the base. So model is something like a generative model that every one of you already has used in ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. It's what we chatted with. And in its base form, when it first came out, also with ChatGPT, it was basically just that. It was a conversational model where you gave in a prompt, you got an output. And a lot of these also moved more towards agentic approaches nowadays, because you can upload files, it can search through the web. So it's not just a conversational model anymore. And if you think back in the days, this is like the old ChatGPT interface. We didn't have the chance to upload images or upload files or upload anything. It was just like this base idea of a model receiving a prompt and then giving you an answer based on its trained data. So this is like the base that we have. And if you want to go towards an agent, then in that case, you give it tools, which for example could be the capability to browse the web, to scrape websites, to receive or pull data from a system that you have. And then later on, you also give it memory. You give it memory and you give it planning or thinking capabilities to iterate, to decide like what tools do I use in order to reach the goal that it was given to me, or to solve the problem that was given to me. So in that case, we would have like a basic understanding of that is an agent. And then if you iterate further on that, there is the case of if you have a trigger and further outputs, you talk more about having like an agentic workflow. But there's a problem that a lot of people, they see a workflow and they say like, okay, this is our agent, but there's like more parts to that. So this is why I did the distinction on that part. All good.
Konferenzen Zeit, Log, Finish.
All good. All right, so this was just important for me to clarify, like on this part, if you have like a further flow where you go to another agent or another tool, then you kind of have a workflow, but the agent itself is part of this workflow. And because I know like a lot of people, also Lars on stage had it, like they say like implement agent on that, and then people on LinkedIn say like I have a new agent who automates my UGC content and so on, and you see this huge workflow. But it's consisted of multiple agents that are inside of that workflow. So it's not just the agent itself that you then usually see there. And now the core message of today's masterclass that I think is important, because I said also with the stats and so on, there's a lot of confusion around and people thinking like, okay, where should I start? Where should I start with my agent? I want to do AI. I want to use this technology. I want to somehow leverage it for my company, but where do I start? And then they see a lot of those people on LinkedIn posting this multi-step workflows and huge concepts, and then they download them, they like can comment on LinkedIn, and then they get the workflow, and then they're kind of overwhelmed because it's quite big and it's not tailored to their needs. So the core message of this talk is the best AI agent doesn't come from the biggest problem, it starts from the smallest process. This is something that Lars also said, that if you want to start with it, and you should see to identify where you can really start. And we're going to repeat on that later, but so what I just said is the biggest problem or the overwhelming part of agents is if you usually see something like this on LinkedIn, where you see like the multi-step workflow and people posting and you have multiple steps, and you see like there's multiple agents in there. It's not just one agent. And some people have the assumption that this is like the first product that they need to build for their company, and which can be quite overwhelming and lead to a lot of complexity and problems in that case. So what I said should start with the smallest process. Like the first agent that you deploy in your company shouldn't really look like this. It should look more something like this in a more simpler way, where you see. We also had this explanation. You see a little bit like what I showed earlier, what an agent is. So we have here like a trigger, which like triggers the agent, and then we have the model, which is like the base of the agent, and then we have the tools connected to the agent, which then give them the capability to iterate through whatever comes through the trigger. And so yeah, like I said, this is the key message for me, is to not think of these huge workflows that you see there, and to think more of like, how can I maybe start with my first agent and then scale up on that. You can reach that system that you see before. You can reach that, but not if you already want to build the whole thing all in one go. You have to start somewhere. And the first agent should be repetitive and boring. It doesn't have to be the super agent which solves humans' biggest crises and humans' biggest problems. It should be repetitive and boring. It should have clear inputs and outputs. A low risk if it goes wrong, because there will be a high chance that in your first tests and your first iterations, there can be mistakes, there can be hallucinations. And also it should be easily measurable. Because this is also still a point, measuring agents or the success of agents is still something that gets left behind in some project, but it's really important to know, are you successful? Is the implementation of your agent successful? To set numbers that give you the chance of measuring the success of the agent, and also in the area where you implement it. So a problem that I also mentioned on earlier is that a lot of businesses, they lose themselves on thinking solution first. So they think of this big workflow, they think of AI will solve our problems, it's our problem solver, and they're not really understanding the problems that they can solve with it or that they have. Like some of them develop the solution first and then they try to find the problem for it that can solve this, which a solution can then solve. So to go into this, and like I said, for me it's more like what I want to try to tell you today is that it's also a big mindset thing. It's not just a mainly technical thing. So the approach for that could be, and I give you an example here, how you could go out here and maybe go into your company or your projects and have an idea of how you can approach this in this way of thinking small, is to first identify the problem. And I know every one of you during work, there's always like funny sentences on the side. I mean, we Germans we are like champions in complaining about our bureaucracy system and saying like, this goes wrong, why do we still use paper there and everything and so on. So the most important thing is that if you want to start to implement an agent into your company, to first identify the problem. To listen to the hurts, to listen to the symptoms that are in your company. So what does your team complain about? Listen to your team. Also in dailies and in events, talk to them. And if they say something on the side like, yeah, I would like to work on that project, but I really have to do this annoying task, which is quite boring and repetitive and so on. This could be a big trigger for you to really get your ears open and have a look at this. It's like, also, what task does nobody want to do? There's probably a lot of tasks where people say like, I don't really want to do this. I don't think I should be doing this, but someone has to do it. And then sits in the night till like 1 o'clock to do it or to fill out the Excel sheet. And then also like, where do you hear like this takes forever or why are we still doing this manually? I also had over the last days on the conference, I had talks with some people who are quite interested also in just talking about the possibility of automating stuff. And they always all said like, we have this process there and it's still manual. And I think that we can definitely automate this. And then I'm usually like approaching them with the message that I'm also saying here and saying to them like, okay, you need to identify the problem and then you need to document the process. Because, and this can also be just in a like hand scribble way to document the process. But as I said, it's important to understand the problem and to understand what you want to solve with AI and not just blindly say like, we'll let AI run on this and solve it. So it is really important that you know what you want to solve and what's the current process of what you're solving. So where can AI really get into this? So it's important that you write down every step. It doesn't have to be like a super duper diagram, but that you at least have an overview and know like, okay, what is currently happening in the process? What is currently, what are points that are maybe slowing down the process? And then if you cannot document it, if you say the process is so unclear, then it will also not be easier if you try to implement an agent if you don't really know what's happening there right now. And then it also helps you, if you document the process, it helps you to look for like triggers or repeatable steps or already defined outputs that you can then later on define for the first agent that you want to implement. And then the last step is, and this is going back to the sentence of the best AI agent doesn't come from the biggest problem, but starts with the smallest scale, is like find the smallest possible angle. It's like if you find a process, for example, in HR or in customer service, don't try to automate immediately the whole process. Look for a part, if you documented it, you can like have a look at it, look for a part in there where you can start. Yeah, so it's for example, like if you want to build an AI customer service, you don't have to automate the whole process. Look maybe to first have like an agent that classifies tickets that are coming in, and not immediately an agent that takes tickets, classifies them, puts them in a table, formulates an answer email, answers the customer, and so on. To really look at a small step in the process that you can start in, and then scale up from that. Because the bigger it gets, the more complex it gets. And so it is important to have a start where you can also still have, in a lot of companies, have a chance to learn what is actually happening there. Because if you just start from big, or you buy a big tool and so on, then at some point, if you don't really understand what is happening there, then it can get quite complex and you lose overview. And then in the end, the result is not what you hoped for. So an approach, if you want to do it yourself, or if you want to try, or have a try together with a partner, for example, like with Gradion, would be to find a starting point and then scale up from there, to not immediately have the whole complex picture in mind. And then if you did that, if you like identified those steps and you say like, okay, I have the smallest possible angle and I know where I can start, then it would go into the building phase. But before the building phase comes, and I said this earlier, it's important to define success metrics. So if you have a process where you already said like, okay, I identify that we are quite slow in this process, then it's important that you also measure this, that you know like, okay, how many days or maybe hours do my employees currently spend on this task, so that you can later on measure like how much faster is it with an agent that is deployed. Because if you like cannot measure it, or if we don't measure it, you cannot improve and scale up on it, because you don't really know is it working or not. And then we have like an iteration circle. So a lot of people also, like Lars say, like an AI agent is like an employee that you put into your company. And an employee is not just you sit him somewhere and he just works. There will be like iteration circles. Like if you build your first agent, you will test it. You will have results. You will maybe not be happy with everything. So you have to learn and go back into the circle and iterate on that. Because currently we're all still in a state where we're trying out a lot with AI and try to find the best possible cases. But if we immediately give up, what Lars also says with the dip curve, then we cannot really learn from it and improve it and build up on it. And together with the metrics, we have a chance to really build up on that. So to give you like a small example, so you have an imagination of how I mean, like the way of understanding the process and finding a process is, on this part we have now a case where someone says like, we need an AI-powered HR system that handles the entire hiring process. So you have like a CEO or someone who says that and comes to you and says like, we want to automate the entire thing. What that actually means is not just, okay, we build an agent who does the hiring. We have job posting, sourcing, screening, scheduling, interviewing, evaluating, and so on and so on. So this process and this AI solution isn't just having like one process that it's solving. There's like multiple processes involved. And if you would try to solve the whole thing in one get-go, it can get quite complex. And without like the right guidance, if you try it on your own, definitely have a big potential for failure, because you're not happy, because the complexity gets too much and the results are not what you expect. So the smallest angle on that part, for example, could be that you just have an agent deployed which auto-screens incoming CVs, for example. So that is like one step of the process, the screening, and has like criteria that you give it before and sorts this into a yes, maybe no. The big advantage of this is that you have one clear input, which is CVs as PDFs, for example. You have a clear output, if you, for example, sort it in a table or so on, where you have a category and a short reasoning that can be given with a CV screening. If you build a prototype of that where you first test it, it can just be done within 1 week instead of like building a huge AI product in 6 months or so on. And it can be measured immediately. Like you can measure how much time you save per week, and the accuracy versus the human screening in the process, which you can then compare. And if it fails, because it's just a small process of the whole thing, nobody gets hurt. So it's a low risk first implementation that you could have here, because in the further process you still have humans in the loop, you still have the recruiter who then can have a look at the output that the agent gives in this part. And the key metrics that we had here, I said earlier, like would be like you could measure the time spent, you could measure how much time does it take to review all applicants and to shortlist them and to have an overview of the best applicants. An agreement rate, so how much, this is what I like said with the accuracy versus the human screaming, like how much are the human results agreeing with the results of the agent. And then also false negatives, so how much failures, or like how big is the failure rate where the agent maybe classified a good candidate as like a bad candidate. So this would be like metrics where you look at, and the false negative is like also one of the most important ones, because this is the most critical number probably of the process where you would look at. And I just see I'm quite fast. So if you guys have any questions because I was too fast, then we will soon come to that. But what is important and what I want to give to you going out of this room is definitely that you think of the first step, and which would be like, what is your frustration? So what is your problem? What is the thing that's always in your ear where you think of that process frustrates me the most? And that's a high possibility that this is where your first agent lives. Because this, and I said that earlier, like with the steps, identifying the problem is like the first step. And if you just think like, now we're just going to do AI and we're just going to put it on top without listening to the frustration, the problems, then you're doing the top-down solution again, which a lot of companies are doing and failing at. And so as a little cheat sheet, if you have this frustration, you look, is your process ready? Like, have you documented the process? Is your team ready? This is something that I didn't talk in detail about, but Lars also said on this, there's like a high conflict also with the team being agreeable to agents or being scared of agents replacing their jobs. So this is a part of it. Then the smallest case, have you identified the smallest case of the process, and have you defined metrics to measure like how successful is this agent and how do we measure it? And it can be code. If you have good coders, or if you're working with a good partner who has good coders on that, it can be code, but it doesn't have to be. Like I showed earlier, like diagrams of N8N and so on, there's tools like N8N, which is also open source, so you can just install it on your own machine and play around with it. There's tools like Make, Zapier, or also Relevance AI and Crew AI, and there's a lot of tools that make it quite easy to low code, try out to build your first small agent. And you can then also scale up on that and build like an orchestrated agentic workflow on that. And yeah, like I said, I'm quite fast because we're already at the last slide. I just want to repeat the sentence again, and I think that this is important that you really get this into your head. The best AI agent doesn't come from the biggest problem. It starts with the smallest process. Start somewhere. Start somewhere. Don't try to start with the new revolution. Try to start somewhere inside of your company where you have a problem, where you have a pain. Start small and then scale up on that to make your own experiences also. And if you then want to scale further, then you talk to us. And thank you so much for listening.